moves d4 and then d5. We're going to be defending the Queen's Gambit with black, and we're going to be taking a look at how black should play against all the various sidelines that white can try in the Queen's Pawn game. And the first one I'm going to look at is the London system with bishop f4, a move which is particularly popular among club players, and will be especially so in 2012 because at the time of recording, Chessbase has just issued a small DVD on the subject by the Danish Grandmaster Henrik Danielsen, where I believe he's recommending this line for white. I haven't seen the DVD myself, but I believe a classical approach is in order here with black, and we're just going to stick with knight f6. Basically, if we are respectful against the London system, we should get a good position. And the first move I want to recommend for black is, again, the classical move here, pawn up to c5. Black puts pressure against white's centre from the outset and introduces the idea of queen b6 into the position. We should note that when white moves his bishop out from c1 early, the b2 pawn becomes undefended, and therefore black should always be looking out for moves like queen b6 in this particular type of position. Now, the London system can be very dangerous to the unprepared player. What black's got to do is not to castle too early. You can often find black casting on the king side straight in to a massive king side attack from white. Basically, white intends to develop by very simple means. He's going to go c3, he's going to go bishop to d3, knight to d2, and he's kind of waiting for black to castle. Then he's going to try and push the kingside pawns forward with h4 and g4. So against this backdrop, c5 makes a lot of sense because we're putting pressure in the centre to try to dissuade white from this automatic pawn push on the king side. Now, white has two decent moves in this position, and the first one I'm going to take a look at is the principal continuation, d takes c5. Obviously, if this move is good, then clearly we can't play this variation with black. But I believe that black has a good way to meet it. Just continue as if we're playing the Queen's Gambit with white, playing knight c6. And suddenly black has the idea of pushing up his pawn to e5 and simply taking that pawn back on c5. So if white comes this way, he's probably going to go bishop b5. That's the main line, and that is the way by which white can try to keep his pawn. Now I recommend the forcing move, queen to a5 check. I believe this is the best move in this position, and it forces white's hand. In order to keep the bishop, white's got to play knight out to c3. And again, I believe black should force the pace here by playing a6. Now white takes on c6, and then once again, if black is allowed to take on c5 in peace, he gets a very good position. So white's got to continue with slightly artificial moves here, queen up to d4. And now I recommend, very simply, pawn to e6. Well, again, white has to continue with forcing play. If he doesn't protect the pawn on c5, then he's going to get a lousy game. Now, he's got two ways to protect the pawn. He can play the immediate b4, which isn't especially good, or he can put his bishop in on d6. If he plays bishop d6, we simply take that bishop, and then we play c5, with a pretty good position. Black is going to regain that pawn on d6 in good time, and has a nice presence in the centre. Black has good compensation for the pawn in this position. So just going back, I'm sure a lot of your opponents will play b4 in this position. Then I think queen a3 is a good move, and white already has some problems because his pawn structure is creaking. Black is threatening the move a5, and this can be seen in the line where white plays bishop d6 now. Takes, a5. Suddenly black has very good activity in this position. But if we go back to queen a3, bishop c7, which has also been played, which tries to forestall a5, in fact runs slap bang into that move. And if white takes with the bishop, we go takes, bishop takes c5, and suddenly white is in trouble. He's got dark squared weaknesses all over the place. Black is getting ready for bishop b4, followed by knight e4. Despite the fact that white is the exchange up in this position, I think he's in desperate trouble. So that would be my recommendation if we go back to the opening variation after c5 when white takes on c5. Just knight c6 followed by queen a5 check seems to give black a very good game. Therefore, the main line is the stable c3, and I believe that's what a lot of London players will play. London players tend to play a lot of positions on autopilot. You know, when black plays c5, they're kind of automatically programmed to play c3. No matter, black can continue with knight c6, and black notes that d takes c5 in this position is again answered by e5 with a good game. So white again tends to play stable moves here, knight to d2. And now I'm recommending that black play classically with e6 and then plays bishop out to d6. This was played in the game Elyanov versus Gelfand, Moscow 2008. Both players are in excess of 2700, and we can say that if a 2700 plays this way with black, then he knows what he's doing. And the main point of bishop d6 is to force a slight concession. White's got to think about that bishop on f4. He can't just leave it there hanging in the air. What he does, he can play another pre-programmed London system move like bishop d3, but then we just take on f4, we take on d4, and white discovers that his pawn structure has been damaged. White hasn't really timed this very well. Black has a good position. However, white recaptures. White can take back with the pawn. We go queen b6. That's nice for black. Or we can take back with the knight. Again, we chop the knight off, and again, queen b6 is just nice for black. White can protect both his pawns with the uncomfortable knight b3, and then we just go bishop d7. Black is well placed. So this is a nice, comfortable way for black to meet the London system. Just e6, knight gf3, bishop d6. And returning to Elyanov versus Gelfand, white decided just to retreat with bishop g3. But once white plays that move, we now see that he can't get his kingside pawn storm going, so it's time to castle. Black has forced the necessary concessions. White played bishop d3. Black now gets on with the classical move b6. The position has changed. Well, black's plan here is a fairly simple one. I think he probably wants just to play bishop b7. The queen can belong on c7 or more likely e7 in this position, and then black wants to bring his rooks to the middle. Elyanov castled. Gelfand went bishop takes g3. In order to keep his pawns intact, white's got to take back with the h-pawn, and now black went bishop b7. So Gelfand has found a very comfortable location for all of his pieces. He took on g3 because he wanted to play queen d6, and now he's certainly thinking about playing e5 if he can. So that's why Elyanov is trying to create a diversion on the queen side with b4. So Gelfand plays carefully with rook a b8. That's the type of move which club players find difficult to understand. But if we take it back, we see that white's idea is probably to take on c5 with the b pawn, and then probably to play rook b1. I would say that is white's plan, or possibly even queen b1. A major piece to the b file, so therefore black anticipates that move. So white leads up to playing e4, and now black plays e5 himself. Very good timing all the way through by black in this game. White plays the principal move b5, black plays the tactic e4. And when white takes on c6, black is ready to take black with the bishop. White takes on c5. Black recaptures with the queen. There's no way that white can keep his extra piece in this position. Instead, he's got to try and find a way to stabilise the position. So Elyanov plays a knight to d4. Gelfand takes on d3. White recaptures, and now just bishop d7, controlling the knight on d4. We note in this position that despite black's isolated pawn on d5, white's got an even weaker pawn on the c3 square, and he's also got quite a weak pawn on a3. So I like black in this position, and black is leading up to putting pressure on c3. So white went knight d2, trying to liquidate by preparing the move a c4. So black stopped him by playing b5. Knight e2 was answered by rook bc8, and knight f4 by queen c5. Just a question of which pawn is weaker here. Well, white's queenside pawns look far weaker than black's pawn on d5. White tries to defend that pawn. Black just plays another careful defensive move here, and after knight b3, Gelfand is happy to exchange the queens. Elyanov takes, d takes c4, knight comes into d4, and black goes knight e4. Well, that knight is annoying for white, so Elyanov tries to get rid of it. And now knight c5, a mature move. Not knight takes g3 in this position, although that move could have been played, but knight c5, Gelfand is eyeing a whole complex of light squares in white's camp. Rook d1, king f8, e4, and now bishop e8. Black is maintaining his slight advantage. And now Gelfand moves in with knight b3. Well, of course, if white takes that knight, then fire opens up against c3, and we've got this monster passed pawn to deal with. So Elyanov prefers just to play rook a b1. Black takes on d4. White recaptures with the pawn, and now Gelfand pushes on with c3. Rook b c1 was answered by rook c4, and knight d5 by doubling up. Now we see the careful point of king f8. Knight forks on e7 aren't permitted. So white goes rook d3, c2, rook d2, and now what's going to stop white from just taking that pawn back on c2? Well, black has considerable pressure in this position. For instance, white can play a move like knight e3, but then we play rook c3, and yeah, this is quite dangerous from white's perspective. So king f2 was played. Black went a5, white went knight e3 now. Rook a4, a different location for the rook. White took on c2. There was a liquidation, and now black has a bishop and two outside passed pawns for white to worry about. Elyanov tried to get active. Black protected his bishop. White played rook b7, rook c3. White went knight d5, check, getting out of the attack, and now a4. It's all a question of how quickly black can push those pawns. So white gets his rook in behind the passed pawn. Rook c8 was answered by knight b6, and now Gelfand played rook d8. The king and pawn ending is winning, so white plays d5. Black plays g5, restraining white's king, and d6 was answered by bishop e6. e5 was answered by king f8, and after king f2, Gelfand tried to break up the pawns by playing f6. E takes f6 was answered by rook takes d6, and rook b7 finally by the advance a3. So wheels have dropped off for Elyanov now. After a2, rook a7, b4, he cannot stop the pawns from advancing. On c4, the bishop dominates white's knight. f7, b3, and in this position, Elyanov resigned.